Silence was one of the defining traits of that quiet neighborhood. I remembered how I laughed when my friend described it as a place where time goes to die. Yes, the streets were lined with identical houses, their manicured gardens standing in stark contrast to the chaos of my inner life. I had moved here to escape the city's noise, mounting debts and nightmares I couldn't understand. My new house sat at the end of the alley, with a red brick wall and a small porch overlooking an almost deserted street. I thought I had found my refuge. I didn't know that hell was knocking at the door. It began on the third day after I moved in. It was a cold autumn evening, and I was immersed in unpacking boxes of books when I heard the knock. A light knock, hesitant as if whoever made it didn't want to disturb anyone. Yet its insistence was frightening. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. I saw nothing. I opened the door cautiously. The street was empty except for a dry leaf spinning in a small vortex of air. A sigh of relief escaped my chest. The wind, I told myself, but the breeze hadn't been strong that night. It happened again the next day, same time just before sunset, when daylight melts into darkness. The same knock. Light, regular, only 3 taps. Tap, tap, tap. I stood behind the door, my eye pressed to the peephole. Again, nothing. But this time I noticed something. A small, hunched shadow briefly formed on the faded wooden porch floor, the shadow of a child's head. I quickly looked down the street to see if someone had passed by, but the street was deserted. A chill ran through my veins. On the third day, I prepared myself. I stood close to the door minutes before the expected time, my phone camera aimed outside through a small gap in the curtain. I heard the knock. I looked at the screen. He was there. A child. No more than 1 meter tall, wearing a worn brown wool sweater and short trousers. His face was unclear, as if veiled by a light fog, but I could see that his head was lowered, staring at the door. He didn't move. He just stood there, then slowly turned and vanished from the camera's view. I didn't see him walk away. He simply faded. I screamed, "Who's there?" and flung the door open. Nothing. But when I touched the doorknob, it was ice cold, even though the rest of the door was warm wood. The daily knocking became a terrifying routine. Exactly 5:30 p.m. 3 knocks. No more. No less. I tried changing my routine, being out of the house at that time, but it was as if that force was following me. Once I went to a cafe far away. At 5:30, as I was holding my cup of coffee, I heard light taps on the window beside me. Tap, tap, tap. I looked. There was no one. But on the glass, where my fearful breath had fogged it, condensation formed the shape of a small child's handprint. Strange details began to seep into my life. I'd find a small, rotten woolen toy on the doorstep in the morning. Photos on my phone sometimes showed in a corner the shadow of that child. One night, while I was showering, I heard the same knocks on the bathroom door. From the inside, tap, tap, tap. I froze, the hot water turning to goosebumps on my skin. I whispered, "What do you want?" And as if the air in the bathroom had grown heavy, I heard a thin whisper like a distant child's voice. "Play with me." Insomnia became my companion. I searched the history of the house in the town's archives. I found a brief story buried in a small column of a local newspaper from 40 years ago. A child named Elias, 7 years old, had disappeared in this neighborhood and was never found. He was last seen wearing a brown wool sweater, going to play near the adjacent forest. My house stood where the garden shed of the neighboring house had once been, long since demolished. There was no mention of door knocking. But things escalated. One evening, after the usual knock, I found a drawing on the living room window. From the inside, it was drawn with a fine white powder, ash, as I later realized. A childish drawing of a house, 2 large figures, and a small figure at the door. Above the small figure was a large X. The next morning, I woke with a heavy weight on my chest, unable to move, and in the corner of the room, I saw that figure standing, watching me. I squeezed my eyes shut, and when I opened them again, it was gone. I decided to confront it. On the 10th day, I stood behind the door, my hand trembling on the handle. I heard the knock. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't wait. I flung the door open, trying to grab whatever was behind it. My hands closed on cold air. And yet, he was standing there. Elias, or what remained of him. Now I could see his face, pale, waxy, with wide black eyes, no whites at all, but his mouth was smiling. A wide, unnatural smile showing small, even teeth. He didn't move. He just looked at me. Then he opened his mouth and a mechanical sound came out, like a broken toy. "Let me in. It's cold outside." I ran back inside and slammed the door, leaning against it with all my weight. The knocking continued. This time it wasn't light. It was strong, angry, hoarse. Bang, bang, bang. The door shook in its frame. I screamed, "Go away!" Suddenly the knocking stopped. A suffocating silence fell. Then I heard a slow, long scratching on the wood from the bottom of the door to the top, as if very long fingernails were dragged across it. Then silence again. He didn't come the next day, nor the one after. I began to think it was over, but the quiet was more terrifying. My house was no longer mine. I felt a presence in every corner. Things moved from their places. The room temperature shifted suddenly, and in the mirror sometimes, I'd see a fleeting reflection of someone standing behind me. I was on the verge of collapse. On the 7th night of his silence, I finally surrendered to deep sleep from sheer exhaustion. A sound woke me, not knocking on the door, but knocking on my bedroom window on the 1st floor. Tap, tap, tap. I opened my eyes. He was there, floating in the air outside the window, tapping it with his small fingers. His wide smile glowed in the darkness as if it were luminous. I looked straight into his black eyes and lost my sense of time and place. I saw scenes: a child running in the forest, a man and a woman screaming, an old wooden box, cold earth, and a crushing loneliness, endless darkness. I woke up on the bedroom floor, my mouth dry and my memory blurred. But the image of the wooden box in the forest was clear, like an unforgettable dream. It was a message, an invitation. I armed myself with an old garden shovel and my phone's flashlight and went out at midnight to the forest behind the neighborhood. I knew the place from the vision. A dense cluster of trees far from the paths. The moon was full, casting deceptive light that created shifting shadows. After hours of searching, I found it. A large, decaying box, partially buried under piles of leaves and dirt. It was perforated with small holes like a toolbox. I lifted the lid with difficulty, silent with terror. It wasn't empty. Inside were small bones, and the bones of 2 hands still clutching a small woolen toy, worn and brown. On top of the bones lay a brown wool sweater. I had found him. I had found Elias. I stood there trembling, unable to think. Then I heard movement behind me. I turned. He was standing among the trees, closer than he had ever been. His wide smile was horrifying, but his black eyes now seemed filled with tears of darkness. A voice whispered in my head, not through my ears, but directly into my consciousness. "Thank you, but the house is still cold. I want my home." I suddenly understood. He wasn't searching for his body. He was searching for rest, for closure. But my house stood where the garden shed once was. Perhaps it was the only place he ever felt safe, the place where he was lost. He didn't want to hurt me. He wanted to return, but he no longer knew how. I went back home, exhausted, carrying the box. I buried it in my backyard under an old apple tree, and I said words I don't know where they came from. "Elias, this is your home now. You are safe. You can rest." I didn't hear the knocking after that night. Things calmed down. Sleep returned, though lightly. I thought I had freed him and myself. I was wrong. 2 weeks passed. I began trying to reclaim my life, but I noticed changes in the house, doors opening and closing on their own. At night, I sometimes hear faint childish laughter coming from the small room under the stairs, which I never used. The temperature there is always colder. And sometimes I find small toys arranged in circles on the living room floor in the morning. He is here. He no longer knocks on the door because now he is inside. And in. Yesterday was the worst day. I woke up in the middle of the night to find myself standing in the small room under the stairs. In my hand was the garden shovel. In front of me, in the wall, was a large hole I had made, as if I had been digging unconsciously. From inside the wall, small hand bones were visible, clutching the woolen toy. I looked at my hands. They were covered in dust and plaster. I didn't remember anything. Now I sit here writing this. It's 5:25 p.m. I know what will happen in 5 minutes. There will be no knock on the door. There will be knocking from inside, from behind the wall of that small room. Tap, tap, tap. And I am afraid. Not of the sound, but of the desire filling me. The desire to answer, to open the wall, to let him out completely. Because Elias is no longer alone in this house. A part of him is now inside me. Sometimes I see the world through his black eyes, and sometimes I find myself staring into the mirror and seeing my smile. It has become wide, far too wide. It's 5:30. I hear it. The knocking begins.